what if your government could freeze your money or decide where you're allowed to spend it instantly? That's not some future problem. In fact, it's already being tested in dozens of countries around the world. I've been tracking the shift towards CBDCs for years, and what's coming isn't just faster payments. It's a new kind of money that gives governments more control than ever before. So in this video, I'll show you how CBDCs work and how they can be used to block what you buy, track where you go, and cut you off from your own money without any warning. So across more than 100 countries, the way money moves is quietly being rebuilt from the ground up. And while that shift hasn't made much noise yet, it's already changing the foundations of global finance. Because what's coming isn't just faster payments or better apps, it's a new kind of currency entirely, issued not by your bank, but directly by the state. They're called CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, and they're not like cash, they're not like crypto, and they're not even like the digital money sitting in your account right now, because they're designed to bypass the banking system altogether, which means every transaction can be settled instantly, tracked automatically, and controlled from the top down without relying on any third party to process or verify what happens in between. Now, some of the first countries to launch CBDCs were the Bahamas and Nigeria, but the clearest signal is coming from China, because the digital yuan has already moved nearly $1 trillion through a real-world pilot program that's now being studied by central banks in Europe, India, Brazil, and dozens of other countries. So this tells you this isn't some sort of a trial run or an academic test. It's a live system that's already operating at scale, and once it's in place, the implications go way beyond faster transfers, because it changes who controls the flow of money itself. And that's where things get interesting, because once you see how fragile the current system really is, it becomes clear why governments are racing to replace it and why this shift is happening faster than anyone expected. So to understand why central banks are investing so heavily in CBDCs, you have to look at how outdated the existing financial system really is. Because even though payments feel instant when you tap a card or send money through an app, the real transaction is taking place behind the scenes, where it needs to be processed through a slow and outdated back end. That kind of delay isn't just inefficient, it becomes a major liability when systems are under stress, because the longer it takes for transactions to clear, the more fragile the entire network becomes, especially during financial shocks or high volume surges where timing matters most. And this is exactly why central banks no longer see the current model as sustainable and are instead building CBDCs to eliminate those delays entirely by removing the need for banks to coordinate at all. Because with a CBDC, money moves in one step, which sounds like a convenience upgrade on the surface, but underneath it marks a complete inversion of how authority flows through the system. Because instead of money passing through a distributed web of financial institutions, it now travels through a single centralized framework where every transaction can be approved, denied, or redirected by the issuer in real time. And when you centralize the entire system like that, something else changes too. Not just how fast money moves, but how much power the issuer suddenly has over what happens next. And it's that part, the invisible part, that most people aren't thinking about yet. Because this shift in control transforms how policy is enforced. Because instead of passing laws or writing regulations, governments can now embed rules directly into the money itself, allowing them to automate enforcement at the point of transaction and intervene in ways that were never possible before. But that same infrastructure can also be used to limit how, where, or when money gets spent, which opens the door to restrictions that go far beyond normal government measures. Because once the issuer has visibility into every transaction, they also gain the power to block, reverse, or delay those transactions based on criteria that may shift with policy, public pressure, or politics. And it's that potential for real-time control, more than anything else, that's raising alarms. And this is where the conversation shifts from what CBDCs do to how they're built. Because once money becomes programmable, it's not the technology you're trusting anymore, it's the people behind it. And to really see what that means, you need to understand how CBDCs are structured at the most basic level. Because underneath all the policy talk, what they're changing is the transaction itself. Now, even if it feels like most of your money is already digital, since you tap to pay, transfer through apps, or split bills in seconds, what's really happening behind the scenes is just a chain of agreements. Your bank promises to send the funds, the merchant's bank agrees to receive them, and somewhere in the background, the actual money gets moved later through systems that were never designed for real-time flow. That's why even the fastest payments today aren't true transfers. They're just deferred settlements dressed up as convenience, and it's exactly that delay that CBDCs eliminate, because in a digital currency issued directly by the central bank, every transfer is final the second it happens, with no intermediaries, no batching, and no reconciliation needed after the fact. So when you send money in a CBDC system, you're not requesting a transfer, you're completing one instantly and irreversibly, which not only reduces costs and complexity, but also removes removes the risk that something will fall in the middle. And in high pressure moments, whether it's a market crash, a disaster response, or a surge in demand, that real-time finality can be the difference between a system that bends and one that breaks. But beyond speed, what truly sets CBDCs apart is that they don't just modernize the plumbing, they redefine who holds the valve. Because when transactions are settled instantly by the issuer, it's not just faster, it's programmable, which means the rules of the system don't sit outside the money anymore, they're built into the way it moves. That's why the system doesn't just need to function, it needs to be trusted, because once the rules are hard-coded into the money itself, the real question becomes who wrote them and whether the public actually believes they'll be used fairly. In theory, a well-built CBDC could increase access, reduce friction, and make the financial system more resilient. But in practice, the only way any of that works is if people actually believe that the system won't be used against them, because without trust, no amount of efficiency will matter. People won't opt into something that gives away too much control, no matter how seamless it feels on the surface. And that's where things get complicated, because public trust in governments, especially when it comes to privacy or oversight, is already low and trending lower, which means even the best designed system could face resistance if it's launched without clear, enforceable protections around surveillance, data ownership, and limits on how the money itself can be modified or restricted after it's issued. Some proposals suggest layering in intermediaries, like private banks or third-party platforms, to add a buffer between users and the state. But others argue for privacy by default systems that make tracking impossible without a court order. But none of those models work unless they're backed by law and transparency from day one. Because the risk isn't just theoretical. Once the infrastructure is live, it becomes much harder to unwind, and if the system is built without real checks in place, then over time, what was promised as a convenience can easily become a tool for control, not through malice, but through the slow expansion of what seems acceptable when the technology allows for more. So in the end, the question isn't whether CBDCs will work. It's whether they'll be designed in a way that earns the public's trust. Because without trust, the system fails before it even starts, no matter how advanced the code or how bold the vision behind it really is. Because once CBDCs go live, they won't just change how you spend. They'll reshape what's possible, what's allowed, and what's monitored. And the most important decisions won't happen at the transaction level, they'll happen long before that in the design phase, where values either get hard-coded into the system or left out entirely. Because the reality is, the things being built today will determine the kind of financial freedom all of us have decades from now. And once that foundation is set, there's no going back. And so in my mind, there's no question that CBDCs will be one of the big financial stories of the next decade. So if you want to dive deeper and learn more about CBDCs and how to protect yourself from them, watch this video next.